So let's talk about what seems to be the new strongest Space Marine army list, and why so many players are striking from the shadows with heavy firepower and jump packs. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd take a closer look at what appears to be the new strongest army list for the Space Marines by quite some margin, with really quite a lot of top tournament players having some good success with some lists that are very similar to each other. Until the more recent balance pass for strong Space Marine lists, it had generally been Ultramarines as the go-to choice. There's loads of draw to the boys in blue, of course. They've got far more characters than the majority of other chapters out there besides the Divergent ones, and a lot of those characters are really quite good in game. Over a few updates though, they had some nerfs. Calgar can't generate his command points if he's in the same list as Guilliman. Guilliman only getting the one discounted stratagem per battle round rather than two, and then going up in cost a bit in the last balance pass. At the same time, we've had Salamander's Imperial Fists and Raven Guard getting new content, each of them getting new or tweaked datasheets for their characters, and also a unique variant on a detachment to go alongside. Imperial Fists and Salamanders have been interesting, probably overall improvements on their detachments, and some fairly small buffs to their datasheets, though it seems that Games Workshop were feeling favourable to the Sons of Korax, giving them a particularly standout cool character, and then a detachment that was a fairly vast improvement on the previous one that most Space Marines can access. The army that so many people have been using is the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon. As chapters go, the Raven Guard were already one of the more interesting non-Ultramarines options if you wanted to go for one, perhaps competing with the Salamanders for the most interesting character datasheets, and without unique detachments that are chapter locked before. That was the only thing to differentiate them. Shrike wasn't as a great character, a fighty jump pack guy, who makes his Vanguard veteran or jump intercessor squad impossible to shoot at greater than 12 inches range, and that gives you a really quite scary big unit that the opponent's going to struggle to get to grips with or strike first. Just with one single character as draw though, who's probably going to be unlikely to compete with the Ultramarines, even if that one character is a good one. The improved detachment that the Raven Guard got was an upgraded version of the Vanguard task force. That was already a solid enough detachment as well. Not quite so commonly played as the Gladius recently, particularly after the Uriel Ventress and Centurions combo got nerfed, but some people were still using it to some good success, and it's certainly been shown to have some top level potential. Basically for their updates, then Raven Guard got gifted Aethon Shaan, as well as having a really cool model. He has some spectacularly powerful rules for 85 points, and then the Shadowmark Talon is the upgraded version of the Vanguard task force. Perhaps the single most impactful thing is being able to return to reserves one unit completely for free while Aethon Shaan survives, but also had some other good rules buffs alongside. Being able to use Hunter's Instincts in the detachment was another massive thing. Here's one example amongst the many that have been used for the Shadowmark Talon to do very well in tournaments over the last couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll go on to see many more examples with very similar lists with either major or minor tweaks to them. This one is by John Lennon of the Art of War, using it to take first at a big event with over 100 players going 7-0, and in terms of damage dealers it feels like it's got three main elements. Aethon Shaan is in command to coordinate as a lone operative. As we'll see in a second, he's pretty excellent in his own right, but having returns to reserves means that you can hand that out to Inceptors or Devastator Centurions. In this one we've got a unit of 6 and a unit of 3 Devastator Centurions with the missiles and las cannons. The main thing that they want is line of sight, and return to reserves can allow that, and the detachment has other things for them too. And then there's 3 units of Inceptors, one big one with plasma and 2 with assault bolters. Again, really enjoying return to reserves when some of their biggest deal is their deep strike, which they can do at very close range if they want to. Then there's 2 big blocks of Vanguard veterans, one led by Shrike for his solo lone operative protection, the other one led by a captain with jump pack with Hunter's Instincts to get them to the fight nice and early, then some objective support style units. Going through that bit by bit, and starting with the new guy, Aethon Shaan is just immense value for 85 points. Lone operatives have pretty good value in their own right, particularly fast ones. It's kind of mad that he can move a big 14 inches, and for a lone operative it isn't a complete pushover to take out as well. 5 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save and stealth. In general though, the opponent's just not really going to have chance to get to grips with him before he hits something hard, and likely does a lot of utility work loitering around in the backfield prior to that. For 85 points, he has genuinely impressive melee as well. The Claws of Sevatar give him 7 attacks at Strength 5, AP 2, Damage 2, with Twin Linked and a massive sustained hits too. That means he's usually going to be averaging around about 8 or 9 hits without any other buffs, and with Twin Linked and Damage 2 on the go, it means he'll have a pretty reasonable impact if he charges pretty much literally everything in the game. Best against sort of medium infantry and space marines, killing around 5 intercessors in one round of combat. He'll only really struggle too much against things that are toughness 10 or higher. Otherwise that's a pretty excellent alpha strike for 85 points when he's got massive movement and lone operative to protect him. The damage he brings is likely to be a late game thing though. As before that in the Shadowmark Talon, he's going to be a useful buffing character. He can mark targets for reroll charge rolls, which should hopefully save you a few command point rerolls over the course of the game. You just need to make sure that you're not tripping yourself up. by interfering with other units' charges that don't want to charge that target that he's marked, but in general wherever it's a simple interaction of one unit charging one other, it's hard to go too far wrong with it. Then as well as that, he gets some free heroic intervention for 0 CP, and could do that at the same time as another unit. Again, that means that he's near guarantees to get the alpha strike on the opponent rather than the other way round, and could potentially strike deep into enemy lines with that 14-inch jump pack move, though with his extra boosted rule from Shadowmark Talon it's more likely to make sense to keep him on the board. Talking of that core rule, the Shadowmark Talon has the same passive buff as the Vanguard Task Force, a -1 to hit and the benefit of cover against ranged attacks at greater than 12 inches. That's usually going to be pretty useful just passively against enemy heavy firepower that's sat back and trying to delete your units. But specifically, if Aethon Shaan's on the board, then you get to use the Return to Reserve stratagems for 0 CP. That's an absolutely massive deal, as being able to just repeatedly redeploy units every single turn is something the detachment's quite likely to want to do anyway. It does just say that he needs to be on the battlefield for that though, so not in reserve. But that's kind of fine for a fast-moving utility lone operative anyway. He wants to be kept safe somewhere in the back lines and perhaps commit to the fight with some punchy damage later in the game. Before we round up Aethon Shaan, the other elements of the army and what they do, I'll just give a quick shout out to ObjectiveMarkers.com, the sponsor of today's video, who surprisingly enough wanted to share their objective marker designs. Really quite common accessories for people to have for Warhammer 40k, these ones being flat discs made of clear silicon, a 40mm objective marker in the centre, and then basically the edges go out 3 inches around that, so basically if your miniatures are touching the disc, they're within range to score the objective without having to measure. I feel like their designs are pretty fun ones. Having the clear match means that you can see the gaming surface beneath them, which you can't for many other options, so I feel like they detract a bit less from the immersive feel of the game. Most of their designs are aimed to add a bit of faction theme to any one army, though they also have quite a fun Auspex merch one as well, appropriate enough for scanning the ones in the midfield I guess. Their markers are shipped out from the UK, they're posted to the USA, Australia and the EU as well. For their faction-specific designs, they've got a whole bunch of stuff. Space Warriors for all your power armoured needs, Astral Military for your human fighters out there, and then other designs aimed at your Golden Guardians, all-devouring space swarms, Force of Chaos, greenskins and other Xenos. You also have a few other things on their site, such as some ruined terrain bases too. Might be of interest to some of you to mark out some terrain footprints. If you'd like to check them out though, you can find them linked down in the video description. A big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to the strengths of the Shadowmark Talon though, and next up we have Aethon Shaan. As mentioned, he was already a very strong character, just a bit more niche given that there wasn't too much else to sell Raven Guard as the top Space Marines around. He has a pretty similar sort of profile to Aethon, a fast-moving jump lone operative with slightly better shooting and trading out the sustained 2 for precision in melee. In general though, he usually tends to be leading a great big jump pack unit, as he basically confers his pseudo lone operative protection to them, and you just can't shoot them outside of 12 inches, giving you really quite a big and scary unit that your opponent's going to struggle to deal with. As being part of the army, he also gives jump intercessors OC2 as well, and that's also pretty meaningful as they're good objective skirmishing models anyway. It seems for people's first common take on the Shadowmark Talon, people are using the Vanguard veterans with jump packs, some of the few surviving firstborn miniatures, and I feel like they're probably going to be pretty likely to get a Primaris update going into 11th edition. They're typically fielded as 10 strong squads for 190 points, and hit with a whole flurry of strength 5 AP1 attacks with lethal hits on the charge, and most people go for the storm shields to give them a 4+ invulnerable save, so a bit more durability on the strike back. The fancy pistols genuinely aren't a bad option though, if you think that the unit's just going to get wiped out anyway on the strike back, and you want to deal a bunch more damage first. Perhaps appropriately for the Raven Guard though, there's not 1 but 2 units of these jump pack veterans hurtling towards the enemy. One of them makes sense and is well justified with Aethon Shaan. Very nasty to have a scary squad that you can't hit back, but the other one is justified with the Hunter's Instincts enhancements, which basically seems to have been nicked from the White Scar style detachment, but given to any model and not restricted to mounted things. This one's a weirdly powerful enhancement that I sort of feel like it might have slipped through Games Workshop's proofreading cracks, as it allows first turn reserves arrival from Strategic Reserve, but unlike the vast majority of other enhancements like this, it allows you to do rapid ingress, as it's not locked to your own turn. It means that a jump pack captain alongside a squad of the jump Vanguard veterans can turn up turn 1. In theory, if the opponent gets first turn, they move things about, and then you can have the unit turn up onto the board, ideally somewhere where they can't shoot it with a whole bunch of guns, and then come your turn, you can use their good movement 12 inches to maybe get an automatic charge on the enemy because you can get quite so close. That's a pretty enormously terrifying threat, and means that the opponent would have to screen super carefully when they get there. The jump captain would even be able to do rapid ingress for free, given that he gets a free stratagem per battle round, so it's not even going to deplete your command points in the early game. Otherwise, for the stratagems for the Shadowmark Talon, there's an infantry shooting one for +1 ballistic skill and boosted AP, provided you're targeting something that's greater than 12 inches away. That's a genuinely meaningful shooting buff. There's a reactive move one that allows you to normal move d6 inches when an enemy finishes a move within 9 inches. If your unit's got scouts or phobos, then you can automatically move 6 inches. That's pretty solidly usable for any unit basically. The big one is that Into Darkness, allowing you to return a unit to reserves that isn't in engagement range. That's mentioned really big for the next 2 units that we're talking about. Regular Armour of Contempt, which is a Space Marine staple, can be very relevant when you've got permanent cover everywhere. The Precision Stratagem went down to 1 command point in this detachment, so it means those scary Vanguard veteran squads could be obliterating a character in a unit before they move on to the rest of the squad if it makes sense to. And then finally they swapped out a sticky objective option for fallback, shoot and charge. And that's a pretty excellent one to have just all around, though perhaps particularly nice for the Centurions. It also gives you some other options with scouts and phobos. Between all that, this detachment just supports those Centurion Devastators rather awesomely. They have had a weird affinity with the Raven Guard, going back to 8th edition, basically being the biggest and heaviest infantry. They can use a lot of synergies of the stealth chapter, even if it is kind of fun to think of Centurions sneaking anywhere. They're typically armed with twin las cannons and Centurion missile launchers for D3 shots at strength 9 and damage D3. That maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but with twin-linked las cannons they're going to be wounding most of the time, and they get 2 fully reroll hit rolls against things on objectives, so they are going to be converting really quite a lot of those shots there. Plus they could be a reasonable enough target for the +1 to hit and extra AP stratagem, and they certainly like the insurance of being able to fall back and shoot, which could be one way to lock up a very serious amount of Space Marine firepower and stop it shooting at you. The main reason they work in this detachment more than others though is their tiny movement, basically compared with the other Space Marine firepower style units. They are absolutely one of the strongest shooting options around, but they trade that off for a massive reduction in mobility compared with the tanks, only moving a tiny 4 inches, as opposed to say 8 or 10 inches or so for tanks or dreadnoughts. It just means that you might often have a lot of very scary guns that can't shoot the thing that they want to. That means they're rather great for the return to reserve stratagem. At the end of the enemy turn, you can just see whether or not they're going to be able to get line of sight to their main target. If they can, then no trouble. If they can't, then use Aethon Shaan to pull them off the board for free, and have them walk on as strategic reserves from the sides of the board, very likely able to get range and line of sight with their long-range weapons. In a similar sort of fashion, there's also the Inceptor squad, quite a different unit given that their main thing is their close deep strike, dropping in anywhere that's greater than 6 inches away, and lighting them up with a whole bunch of twin-linked heavy pistol fire. The plasma ones are good against hard targets, the assault bolters very nice at clearing out lighter infantry. They're both very viable. Given they pay such a premium for close range deep strike, being able to return to reserves them is also absolutely excellent. If the opponent doesn't manage to deal with them, then they can be off to strike something else, maybe doing a massive pinpoint blow and the unit remaining hidden while doing so, and then rinse and repeat next turn. If they can afford to drop it greater than 18 inches away and many get used for damage, again they could use the +1 to hit and extra AP stratagem. That could be pretty scary on a big unit of plasma exterminators, and fall back and shoot could give them some extra options as well, even if they can fire those pistols in melee. Basically going heavy on the Inceptors, Centurions and Vanguard veterans provides the main damage of the army, and then Space Marines are rather well supported for a vast amount of cheap support objective units, many of which have additional things here. Scouts are nice cheap infiltrators, generally used in good numbers, and they have a few more bits of helpful support with the stratagems here, such as access to advance and charge if they want it. Jump intercessors are good skirmishing units, and with Aethon Shaan they can all be OC2 as they go about their business. If all your damage dealers are in the right place for doing what they want to as well, they could also return to reserves and be a deep striking utility unit late game to score some more points. It does probably make more sense to do so on Inceptors though if you get the choice. The lack of a sticky objective stratagem is only a small nerf to Space Marines, given they can take some intercessors to get that on the go anyway. Incursors are also phobos, and they can spot targets for the Centurions or Inceptors, having them hit on a 2+. They've got reasonable enough stat lines with their melee and mine as well. And the Combi Lieutenant is a staple on a whole bunch of Space Marine lists. Really quite nice to add yet another lone operative that's going to be hard to deal with. Between him and Aethon, you could have utility units screening quite a bit of the Space Marine backfield. He puts a damage buff on the midboard, and it's nice and expendable and can do secondary objectives. In this detachment in particular, he also gets the option of the Coronal Susurrant. That's one of the rules that gives you a +1 command point cost to enemy costs within 12 inches. Another very disruptive thing to interfere with enemy plans if he can be somewhere on the front lines but surviving. They also have 2 other enhancement choices that are maybe a bit of a luxury but usable enough in list variants: the Blackwing Shroud for Infiltrate, and Umbral Raptor to have yet another lone operative if you like one, though it feels like you're probably already doing fairly well for them so far. Gaining Hunter's Instincts on the enhancement front was really quite a big deal though. There has been one rules question that's come up a few times regarding the Shadowmark Talon, and there is a rules as written argument for them not getting the boosted Oath of Moment yet, at least as Games Workshop have left the FAQs. Core Codex chapters and detachments were given the +1 to wound via Oath of Moment in a past balance pass. Given that the Raven Guard can't be fielded outside of the Core Codex, it sort of stands to reason that they should get this, though weirdly enough with Games Workshop's FAQs they define the +1 to wound bits by only going on Core Codex Space Marine detachments as well as not being on the Divergent ones, and in another FAQ they defined what the Core Codex Space Marine detachments were, and it doesn't yet list the Shadowmark Talon. To me, this just feels like a case of an old FAQ that was meant to define a ill-defined thing previously, not having taken into account future detachments that were coming out. I strongly suspect it to get patched, and the app does kind of imply that it's supposed to be a Core Codex detachment as well, as it's listed alongside the rest of them. Personally, I would absolutely play with and against it having the boosted Oath of Moment rule. The intent seems very clear to me, though it does unhelpfully seem that some tournaments have been ruling it either one way or the other. One notable tournament that ruled against you being able to use it this way was the UKTC. So I believe that you weren't able to use the boosted Oath of Moment for Shadowmark Talon in the Raven Guard there. That certainly didn't really seem to stop it though. There's one of these in the top 8 and another one that placed very highly as well. Obviously a strong list, but also requiring huge player skill to be one of the ones with a strong list placing this highly. To round up a few variant lists on the first one that we saw, this one was the list by Paul Neuberger, really quite similar to John Lennon's list that we saw earlier. And it looks like the main changes compared with that one is losing one squad of the Bolter Inceptors and the +1 command point debuff on the Combi Lieutenant, and instead of that gaining one unit of Scouts and one unit of Incursors to spot some targets and Scouts. Otherwise pretty well everything else is just incredibly similar. Then for another slight variant on the list that also placed highly at the London Grand Tournament, this one was by Nassim Fouchain. Again the same main damage dealers as the previous ones, 2 big blocks of Vanguard veterans, 9 Centurions and 12 Inceptors once again. This one goes for the infantry support being Incursors, Infiltrators and Intercessors, so no jump Intercessors at all in this one, and the Combi Lieutenant does take the command point debuff. Then for a slightly less cookie cutter one that won a tournament in Mallorca, this one by a Sibelius goes for 6 Centurions and the 2 squads of 10 Vanguard veterans. It doesn't use Inceptors though, instead going for a Judas Era and Blade Guard with the Infiltrate enhancement, Scouts, Incursors, Infiltrators and 1 squad of jump Intercessors as the objective support, and then replacing the Incursors with a couple of Ballistas Dreadnoughts, which are rarely ever going to be a terrible idea as a gun turret in a Space Marine army. It certainly seems that with a lot of players the main staple damage dealers are pretty much agreed, and for a lot of people it's maybe more of a choice for which way to support them, though I feel like in reality you could trade out some of the damage dealers for other things like this, and you wouldn't exactly be losing loads of strength. Overall, it's certainly cool to see the Raven Guard doing well, being both viable and strong. There has been a bit too much of the Ultramarine domination of Space Marines recently. Though on the other hand though, it doesn't exactly feel like Space Marine balance is any better than it's been in the past. It kind of feels like we've just swapped one more standard way to play for another. Most Space Marine players out there don't generally collect Raven Guard. It's great for those that do, but not so helpful for the ones that don't, or don't want to run some sort of proxy. I feel like with the list being heavily dependent on Centurions and Vanguard veterans, the Vanguard veterans probably due a Primaris update at some point, and the Centurions being one of the firstborn units that I'd be at least concerned for the future survival of. I can't imagine that too many people would be massively tempted to expand to try and make this list. At least for early stats though, it does look like it's the single strongest way to play Space Marines by quite some margin. The Grand Tournament results alone tell a pretty clear story, and for more general win rates it's still fairly clear there. Space Marine win rates overall around 45% or so, though I saw StatCheck 40k had Shadowmark Talon listed at over 60% win so far, albeit with very limited data. I feel like this kind of thing happens really quite a lot with Space Marines, where plenty of army lists that any one player might make with their real collection might be a bit underwhelming, but they have just 1 or 2 really quite clear tournament builds that overperform. Let me know your thoughts on the army though. Have you played with or against Shadowmark Talon yet, and what were your experiences if so? I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. That's it for this one, though a big thank you to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring the video. If you'd like to check out their fancy faction themed gaming accessories, there'll be links down in the video description below. They've got plenty that could well fit for a bunch of 40k armies, plus also those channel merch design Auspex ones. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more about this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel and keep these videos coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.